Gotta have fun first. Doing city's business.
Okay. All right. Good evening. Welcome to the May 20th, 2025 meeting of the Everett Planning Commission. Ayana, would you please call the roll?
Chair Chatters,
Here.
Commissioner Sullivan,
Here.
Commissioner Shelby,
Here.
Commissioner Rutledge,
Here.
Commissioner Welch.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Shtahobsh people and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society. Commissioners, we now have an opportunity for reports. Any reports today?
Not today.
Okay, then we will hand it over to staff.
Good evening, Planning Commission. York Stevens Wadge, the Planning Director. With me is Alisanne Wetzel, Long Range Planning Manager. Is the meeting agenda on the screen? Great. Staff comments, I will just give an update on the progress of Everett 2044 as we hit into the home stretch of the home stretch, the tray tables up and all of that. We are here on May 20th on the third of three workshops on development regulations, working through each of the chapters, and we've gotten through half of 1908. So we'll keep going numerically up the list from there. Tomorrow we have a city council briefing, and I don't think we advertised it as a public hearing, but we accept public comment at all meetings. So it may as well be a public hearing, but we're going to give a full update to the city council. And I think the main focus of this is going to be the public comment themes that we've heard and some of the changes that we're working on to the April 7th draft to get them up to speed with that. And then we'll see what questions, comments, and final direction the council has as we put the final touches on what will be the final draft and set of ordinances that are provided to the city council for their June 4, 11, and 18 standard first, second, and third readings and proposed action. Before the city council does their final legislative work on Everett 2044 periodic update, the Planning Commission will have its formal public hearing. This has been noticed in the Herald and all of the legal formal channels. So this is the last great opportunity for the public to come speak to the Planning Commission. Comments in writing up until noon of that day will be made available to the commission. And then, of course, we'll have an opportunity for verbal comment at that May 21st meeting as well. The June 3rd Planning Commission public hearing. And then we'll be asking the Planning Commission for a recommendation on the complete package, putting a bow on, I think we're up to almost 40 meetings worth of work on this and a couple hours each. A lot of hard work has gone into this. So I'd like to think a little bit as we're working through the development regulations and churning through those last chapters for you to keep in your minds what sorts of content you would like to go into that recommendation. Traditionally, for legislation and for other actions like this where we need a planning commission recommendation on it, staff would prepare a proposed resolution with recitals that explain the process, describe some of the purpose and goals behind the piece of legislation. And then ultimately, I imagine that we will recommend a do approve to you, and then you'll have the opportunity to consider that, make amendments to the resolution. That can be anything from big to small topics that you think should have further study and further work after the update. Amendments that you think should be made to what we've provided to you and where we land in the final draft that will be distributed prior to that June 3rd meeting, or any other topics that the commission feels would be worth communicating to the council and to the public at large. The next day, we will go into the first reading of the ordinance with the city council, and then we'll have a public hearing on June 11th. So for the public listening, the last two major public hearings are June 3rd with the Planning Commission and June 11th with the city council. But public comment is accepted at all meetings. And then June 18th is when we'll be asking the council for their consideration of the Everett 2044 ordinances and a resolution declaring the state required periodic update to be complete. Any questions about process and timeline?
Quick question. So is the council having a public hearing tomorrow? Is that, yes?
It says on the slide, public hearing. It is not advertised as such, but they accept comments at all
Okay.
meetings.
I just want to double check I was hearing that right.
The different, some bodies do not accept public comment at all meetings, and in those cases, a public hearing is an important piece of it. Public hearing does have specific legal
Yeah.
notice requirements, herald 15 days, all those sorts of things. We didn't do all that for June 3rd or for May 21st, but if folks want to give their comments to the council, they're welcome to.
And then if the council approves this on the 18th, if that becomes their final action day, when does like everything we've done become
Effective?
effective, like the zoning maps and all the different changes that we made? When does that become final by the city?
I think it's 15 calendar days after the mayor's signature. We are racing a June 30th deadline to adopt a lot of this. And so we'll ask the mayor for her signature that night, I think, and she'll probably be able to give it. And so that would put the effective date 1 or 2 days after the 4th of July holiday, middle of that week. So we will turn our attention during that 15 days to getting the permit crew ready. And they've already been working with these regulations and are ready to start communicating with applicants. And we've been sharing that there is this process going on with folks who have projects in the pipeline as well.
Do you expect an increase in permit requests like quickly?
I do. I have heard of quite a few projects that are holding on and waiting for this, either because it's more, they wouldn't be able to build the project until the zoning is in, or there's some other advantage to it. And so I think there's a set that are waiting that would have otherwise applied this month, last month, or even a couple months ago. And then slowly, I think interest will pick up after that. But yeah, I think we would expect a little bit of a bump right after this. Okay, I think that is it for public comments. We will be sharing, we are preparing a public comment report that lists all of the outreach and public events and everything that we've done over the 3 years of this project. We've collected all of the written comments and we've transcribed some of the verbal ones at open houses and everything. We have a full database. I think we're in the 300 or 400 comments currently delineated in that database. We're going to share the raw output of those comments with the Planning Commission and the council, and we'll put it online as well at everettwa.gov/2044 so that you have an opportunity to start reading through it, or it's in PDF format, so it's easy to word search a topic of interest or something that you've been working on. And then with this complete package around the last day of May, we will have the full comment report, which will summarize some of the major themes. And again, we'll be talking about this tomorrow as well. So look for an email and then a posting to the webpage of this output from the comments that we've heard so far. Staff have read every single one of them so far. You've seen a lot of them throughout the course. I think that's the only other thing I wanted to mention. If no questions on that or anything else, then we're ready.
Okay, thank you. We have a brief opportunity for public comment. I didn't receive any forms in person. Do we have anyone online who wishes to provide comment?
Would caller with phone number ending in 8024 like to make a comment? Caller with number ending in 8024.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Nope.
Okay,
not at all.
would caller with number ending in 6531 like to make a public comment? Oh, they're gone. They're all gone.
Right. Thank you. Okay, then it sounds like we're ready to move on with our presentation. Do we have, I didn't receive any forms.
They just.
Stephen, is this Helter? Heltney. Okay, thank you for helping me pronounce your name. If you wouldn't mind stepping to the mic and state your name and your city of residence, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Please confine your comments to 3 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Stephen Heltney. I'm a resident of Bothell, Washington, but I have projects going with developers, real estate investors and such in Everett, Shoreline, and Seattle. So yeah, I appreciate this community's feedback and everything. I know parking's a big point of interest for this meeting. Looking at some parking regulations and trying to find a way to make it easy to develop the projects with keeping parking in mind. I know one of the ways that was presented is having parking stalls and then a shared yard. I think there is a place for that, but I think the majority of people are going to want garage parking. Garage parking involves driveways, and I'm working on a project right now that has 2 driveways that we've been getting a lot of pushback from the planning department on the going out onto the main road and then the spacing between the 2 driveways. So anything we can do, the community said they wanted more parking. I think in order for these to be more feasible for the end user that's going to be having them, they want parking, which would include driveway and garage parking. So just finding a way to make those easier to develop instead of putting more regulations against it. I think that would be a great thing for the community and make these projects more feel like home. A couple things from the other development standpoints that we've talked about, keeping the DADU plan in mind. That's a great business model. It's a great model to bring homes quickly to the community. Developers are going to love them because they're getting a discount on some of their fees. It's, the smaller plans, when you're paying cost per square foot, they're going to be easier to build. So that's a good way to get houses into the community quickly. And I think we don't want to completely abandon that idea. Instead, try to work with some of the benefits of that program and try to get a lot of those in the community as much as possible. There's some great plans. So just, not abandoning that altogether and just really trying to enrich the gains that you guys have already made off of those, I think would be a great idea. And I know Dave Gardner was here and he presented some feedback in email. There's some bullet points that he wanted to kind of go over those, but I think they're a great program that we would love to see still exist. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heltney. Did we have any other forms that I missed, Ayana? Okay. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to proceed with our next agenda item, development regulations.
Okay, here we go. So on everettwa.gov/2044, all of the materials are available there. We're working from the April 7 complete review draft and a book 2 that was issued on May 10th. So far, and I want to stress that the Planning Commission has worked through virtually all of these issues once earlier in this process in a more general sense. So we are returning to these. We're going to go quickly through a couple of these chapters because there's a lot to get through and we're running short on time. So far on April 15th and May 6th of this year, we worked through the chapters on the screen there. Zoning districts, definitions, uses, lot setbacks, and residential densities. And then we started the neighborhood residential development standards 1908, which has been renamed from something else. We'll pick up right where we left off with 1908, and these are the middle housing standards, and then keep on going through the rest of the chapters that are part of Everett 2044 development regulations. That includes a couple of new chapters that were part of that May 10th book 2, parking being the most significant of them, which was a major update based on some changes to state law regulating what cities can regulate for parking. More modest changes to the other chapters in the new set. And then on the right side of your screen, you see 2 columns worth of chapters that are just code and zone reference updates. If something referred to R1, R2 zones, now it should refer to the NR zones. There are small differences in what was one and what is the other, but they're on the edges. And for the most part, we just did a straight mapping from the most equivalent zone. Worth taking a look at, make sure we did it right, but there was no intention of having a substantive change to things in those chapters. Okay, so picking up on 1908 neighborhood residential development standards. A reminder, because this was one of the questions that came up at the end of the meeting last couple of weeks ago. Where did this come from? Middle housing required by the state that we allow forms of development in single family zones that have not been allowed for the most part since 1956. So we had to build a whole new set of regulations for how these modestly more intense forms of residential development could fit within our existing single-family character, as is the goal of the law and the subject of many comments that we've received. We used the state model, a traditional neighborhood design middle housing toolkit of objective development and design standards, which was prepared under the direction of the Department of Commerce with consultants, Opticos, who were the ones who kind of played a part in the resurgence of middle housing recently. So a lot of these things, especially around shared yards and building orientation, came out of this work, and that's all available on the Department of Commerce's website. Applicability of this chapter. This is development standards in the neighborhood residential and neighborhood residential constrained zones. So all development in those zones, and then also in other zones, development of detached 1 and 2 unit dwellings and townhouses up to 3 stories in height, any number of them. That is also roughly what is captured under the International Residential Code for the building codes. So this is a change. Currently, 1908 is only for the single family zones, regardless of development type. And then 1909 is standards for the bigger zones, multifamily and mixed use zones, regardless of type. So if you're building a townhouse in the MU zone, you would use 1909 instead of 1908 currently. We have had a lot of difficulties with trying to match the building style, and all of the regulations are oriented more towards apartment buildings and mixed use buildings. And so they're not a great fit for townhouses. So we are revising the applicability so that all townhouses and detached houses and accessory dwelling units and those types of things will be handled under 1908. Orientation and yards. This is where we left off the conversation last week. Currently in the April 7 draft, we have the top 2 here, not the third, but this is one that we are adding and have penciled into the final draft based on comments that we've received. But so far for the first 2, dwellings must either face the street, which includes a street facing facade with the residential private frontage type, which are different types of porches or entryways, or face a shared yard, which must be 15 feet in any direction, like the image up on the screen there. We had some comments that alleys would make a good fronting direction as well. And so we have added that provisionally for the final draft, that you should either face a street, shared yard, public alley. Why regulate orientation in yards? We turn back to the design and development goals and policies that we worked through earlier this year, and those include some suggestions on both sides of this. We want clear and predictable development regulations, and in fact are required. So keep in mind throughout all of this that all of our development standards for housing need to be clear and objective, and we cannot rely on administrative design review or any other sort of design review to say, is this good or not? Either it is 5 or it is not. It is not be similar, be quality, be consistent, any of those sorts of things. Needs to be clear and predictable. We want a variety of welcoming and inclusive public and private spaces. We want to enhance human and environmental health and equity. And then I think the top policy on here is probably the number one, I guess, underpinning policy for some of the orientation and street fronting work that we have in this document here. So I will read just that one. Maintain a continuous, consistent, walkable, and human-scaled pedestrian environment at the interface of buildings and the public realm. Promote interaction between indoor and outdoor activities to create an inclusive and vibrant public realm. in a nutshell, I think that is the purpose of requiring buildings to face street, shared yard, alley, and include those sorts of frontage types. A reminder again where this comes from on the commerce guidance, and this is an image that they put together on kind of the expected progression of middle housing as the buildings in color are added to a neighborhood that was otherwise single family. Couple of images from around mostly Snohomish County. These are I think these are all townhouses, pretty much street engaged orientation. And I use that to mean that the front door is facing the street. Townhouses are made to sit side by side, so they all have a pretty consistent front and back is where much of the visibility is, because your sides often will be a shared wall. And so you design them with the stairwells and things that don't have as much visibility and permeability.
I have a quick question on this before you move on. So the middle image on the bottom,
Yes.
when I look at that and I see the more like, it's a private road or private driveway, and that's considered street. And that's right, because they're facing, I'm sure the ones on the main street are facing out, but what about the unit in the back? It's not a shared yard.
Right. Yep. So I think that's an example of a development. And I think to the spoiler alert, when we get to the options, staff will suggest that we ease up on the shared yard bit to facilitate different development patterns, but maybe keep the buildings on the street facing the street. So this would be an example of that. So if you're walking the sidewalk, you see images like what you see around it, but then you're not prohibiting, precluding, or limiting the buildings that are on the interior of the lot.
I think that was the design I was concerned about, because I see the more stacked building design more often, but that solution is good enough for me. I mean, that was what I was worried about. It's like, how do you make that back unit make sense? But if we kind of are incorporating the shared driveway, making shared, then that works for me.
I cannot remember what jurisdiction this is. I am frequently surprised at how hard it is to get Montlake Terrace, I think. Yeah. Frequently surprised at how hard it is to get up there in lot coverage. This looks to be higher than the lot coverage in the neighborhood residential zone. And again, that's one of the frameworks for this is if you're going to leave 40% of the land open, that's one of the main characteristics of single family neighborhood. If you're not counting doorknobs or families, it is yards and some open space as part of it. Here's another one. So again, you can see how the side units frequently have less visibility, although certainly there are options of design that can have more three-sided openness. Here's kind of the broadside driveway orientation that we're concerned a little bit about the street presence and the openness, or I guess a cold shoulder to the public street. Fewer windows, no visible entry. Usually they will be facing, maybe it's a longer cul-de-sac that acts like a road. Every corner lot is going to have one side to a public street and one side to or one front to a public street and one side to a public street. But for some of these, that is not the case, and it is more just a driveway. And we've got an example of that next. Somebody, I think, mentioned this at the last meeting on 5th Avenue West. So I don't know if this was the exact development, but this
Wasn't in
is
fact the exact development.
okay. I figured as much after looking around the area. So here's one where there is a door facing the street. So we need to think about, again, these are, we set the rules and then do not have the discretion. So if you were to say include a door on the street and that's about it, you might get this. And I think we do have these regulations around having an entry close to and with a porch on the corner kind of a thing. But otherwise, this would be an example of the kind of a broadside orientation.
Hold on. This is what we're saying you need to do.
This is what the current regulations would prohibit because none of these buildings face the street or anything.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure I'm following because this image is not something that I would recommend.
Right, right. This one is kind of a mixed orientation, and you can see also there are so many different ways to design and even little differences in paint and texture and those sorts of things, which we're not able to regulate. So we will take what we can get. But these do have more of a real, I think, door on the street, while generally otherwise facing the driveway. You can see how that kind of modulation, if that's the right term, helps break up the mass of the building and everything. And you can see what it looks like from above on the side there.
Can I ask a clarifying question on this one? So under the current draft, this would also not be allowed. Is that correct?
Correct. The current draft with the shared yards and everything would be almost impossible to have 2 rows facing a driveway. It would be more like you'd have a row and then a road up the side, and then you'd have a cluster around a shared yard, or front to back, those types of things. And then we've got a case study in Everett, and this is a property that has a lot of the characteristics that we're kind of thinking about. So it seemed like a helpful one to just bring through some of the pros and cons of different development types. So there's one house set very far back on the lot, and there is a private access drive going to rear developments from a short plat. There's another private access drive directly adjacent to it. Property owners were not able to share a driveway or create a public street or anything. So the driveways aren't always touching like that, but it's not uncommon in Everett. This is what it looks like on our GIS system. The yellow are the couple of shared private access drives and access easements and some utility easements as well. You can see where the house here is positioned. Zooming in a little bit, you can see the property, the setback in the neighborhood residential zone. We've got 10 in the front, 5 on the sides, and I think staff is going to move forward with a 5-foot rear setback so that we can call it 10 feet if you're on a street and 5 feet if you're not. I actually picked that one up from Linwood, who is moving that direction right now as well. And then you can see the access easement taking I think it was a 10 or 15 feet strip out of the property. So here is a proposed concept for this property that would have 3 sideways townhouses on the street with garages in each one. And then there's 1 bedroom and a bathroom on the back side, and then stairs up to the rest of the living area up above. So this would be an example where it does not face the street, does not face the alley, does not face the shared yard. So we would have to reject that application under the current draft. So here's a rendering of 3 kind of options here. On the left would be door number 1, and that is the proposal that would, if you were free from street, shared yard, or otherwise orientation. If you were to turn the units to face the street, you cannot fit all 3 of them. And so you would have a penalty of 33% of the housing on this project. Most likely that 3rd unit is you start to get into economies of scale and probably definitely costs less than the first 2 units. So you're probably pushing the price up for the other ones. Overall, not what we're looking for, although this one would probably have a good street presence and would leave some open space for the existing, or for all of the units, or however it's arranged. And then also has, at some point, the house in the back will probably come down, and then that leaves a little bit more space in the back for future development. But no denying that it is a cost to housing affordability, and a lot of indicators that we're seeking right now. On the right side is perhaps, and this is just sketching and trying to illustrate some of the things here. if we were to require the units close to the street within some distance, 30 feet, 40 feet, something like that, to front on the street, and then everything else does not have to, then perhaps you could get to something like on the right. There's surely better ways to arrange this than these kind of sketches, but I note a couple of things. No garages. I guess in the middle version, you could probably come around the back and have garages in the back and then front door on the front, which the objective design standards from Commerce and everything is really keen on, because that separates the pedestrian from the vehicle access paths, and each kind of have their own entry. On the right, I don't see how that would be possible. I guess you could, yeah, you would have the front door and a garage maybe on that middle unit, but the ones on the street would have to have surface parking. So comparing the one on the left to the one on the right, I would say by separating one of the units, you're probably increasing construction cost a little bit, because you're not having it all be one building. Complexity of the design, foundations, and all of that. How much more expensive or difficult, I don't know, but maybe in public comment in the next few weeks, we can get some feedback on things like that. Yeah, so that's kind of, I guess staff is open to door number 3 and door number 2. I don't think, and we need to think also about the wide variety of parcel types. A note about this street, it's a dead end just down the street, not expecting a whole lot of people walking by. But on the other hand, it is an opportunity for a cohesive neighborhood feel around that one street, kind of like a bigger version of a cul-de-sac. And then this is in a part of the city that does have a lot of deep lots, flag lots, and this is going to be probably a repeated thing here. Other parts of the city have, North Everett has more the 50 by 100 smaller lots, less deep, and alleys. So put up a couple of options for your consideration. We don't need to decide here, but since we were talking about this a lot last week, and we heard some pretty strong opinions from the Planning Commission, and so we went right back to the drawing board to think of how to take a big step towards more flexible. Option to front on the alley was one that we already had going into last week. That second one, to only require street facing for dwellings close to the street, is a something that staff would be comfortable with. Then what do you do with the yards? Do we still have a shared yard, but it's just you don't have to front on it anymore? That surely makes the site design more flexible and more likely to get our housing production and everything while still having a shared yard. Should that shared yard be in the corner, on the side, in the middle, those sorts of things? Going to be long and linear, that sort of thing? Or is it just open space that there's a certain percent in any configuration, whether it's landscaping or not, or none of the above? Those are some, love to hear any feedback that you have now, and we'll, yeah.
Can we noodle on this for a second and chit chat about it? Okay, I'm trying to do a pro con list on some of this quickly to figure out what are we trying to prevent? Not what are we trying to allow, but what are we trying to prevent? What are we trying to prevent?
I would say a cold shoulder to the public street.
Which is non-front facing, just like you're looking at the side.
Lack of
eyes on the street.
Yeah.
Lack of eyes on the street has huge social conflicts down the road. I mean, if you don't feel safe walking down, if you don't feel safe walking down the street, you don't walk down the street. We're trying to create an active, walkable community. So those are just some of the things. And we are also trying to create a healthy community where people walk. And if you don't feel safe walking, you're not going to walk. And those things do build up.
And when homes don't face the street, that is indicative of lack of safety during walking.
It can be, yes. It has been proven that way, yes. Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of a compromise is making the closest unit to the street facing while allowing. And street facing is just a front door, like front door, porch,
Windows.
windows.
Yeah, we would define it, I think as it's defined in here is that you include one of those 7 or so porch types. So that would be your indicator.
Okay, so
So if you go
walkability.
back to the slide that showed the multitude of windows on both sides, that gives you the opportunity to see where you are going or people around. It also provides indirect lighting, which is another aspect of it. So you are not you're lighting the area too.
Okay.
The only thing that causes me to shift my perspective at all is if there is actual empirical data around a health impact on this issue. Other than that, I stand fully by everything I said last time we had this discussion. I because I don't know the social science data around it. So if there is some, I would like to know more about it. But I don't see a problem with that version number 1. Because it does increase the utility of the lot. It provides more housing. I don't necessarily agree that aesthetically it's a problem. But if there is data around an impact to health and safety and the welfare of the community, based on how this could be designed, then I think that is very relevant and that would shift my perspective.
Well, just as I don't see why we're trying to limit. I mean, I really don't care if it fronts the street. It's just a personal choice, but I feel like we're just limiting what can be built by forcing the front to the main street all the time.
I also want to talk about the parking implications of this. I think that our commenter made a good point about the garage parking. I think that is a huge asset to things that are built these days. And I think a lot of buyers are looking for that in our market. So just looking at the visuals that you presented, and thank you for presenting those are really helpful. Also just thinking about the parking options like you mentioned. I think that first option, if we're not going to allow that, it's making garage parking really difficult on those lots as well.
It does rain a lot here.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
You can figure out a way to make everybody happy. That'd be great.
We're trying to get to a good balance here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that this is all market solvable, right? Like the orientation of the house, the yard size. These are things that the buyer is going to dictate as to what they want in the unit. And they'll get built or they won't get built. And somebody will build it, experiment, and be like, oh, those didn't sell. Okay. Like this doesn't seem like a problem that's going to exist very long. Like if you build a bunch of stuff and it faces and it doesn't sell, nobody's going to build them, right? Like that doesn't seem to me like that's going to be a thing that repeats time and time again as a poor investment from a development perspective, but that's just me.
Yeah.
There's a neighborhood near me. It's technically in the county. I believe both sides of the street are in the county, but I could be wrong. One neighborhood is probably built maybe 20 years ago, and it's like you drive in, right? It's this U-shaped, but there's also like an alleyway. And so that row of houses that faces the main road, Then you have a development on the opposite side of the street, which was probably built in the last 10 years, does not have that requirement. So it might be city and county. And all of these houses face towards each other. It looks odd when you drive through it. Nobody uses their front door because the sidewalks around it don't exist. So you just have like maybe 2 blocks that face a street with sidewalks. and nothing else connects to it. So as much as I understand a lot of this probably looks more like you can see it more in North Everett and places that have a lot of walkability currently, it doesn't really match up quite yet with more of like a South Everett or places that don't have a squared grid. So I understand that we're trying to build walkability, sidewalks, but that's not going to come as fast as the units need to be built. So I think that's where I struggle is I'm coming at it from a lens of more my neighborhood where it just doesn't always work the way it probably does in North Everett. So again, if you can find a way to make everybody happy, that'd be great.
I'm thinking to Commissioner Shelby's comment about whether something sells or not. And I would say in public policy, we are almost exclusively in the business of addressing community impacts and externalities. And there are a lot of cases, and most of them involve cars, where what is rational and good for you isn't good for all of us. And if we all did it, we wouldn't be happy. So that sort of a thing. And I think this plays into that as well. You'll probably find a buyer for a lot, but will it in general erode the livability of a street? Will it make it uncomfortable for anybody to walk places? Will it make it difficult for you to know your neighbors and to be part of a community and all of the pretty fuzzy but real public good that comes from that, of a complete community and all of that. But heard?
Yeah, I think that's gonna be the challenge is, where's the median, where, how do we meet all these different goals at the same time? Yeah, there's gonna be some give and take here.
Absolutely. Very conscious of the overriding priority of housing. The other last kind of thought on this is whatever we're coming up with, and this is brand new rules covering like 3/4 of the city, is not going to be perfect. And so we're to some extent deciding which side to start on. Start more flexible and then see if we get some negative results that we want to fix and adjust that direction, or start more restrictive and then see if that was too restrictive and we're not getting the kind of production, or there are too many barriers, and then loosen it up from there. I can see arguments on both sides of that.
I thought that's what we did with the last comp plan. Yeah. Yeah, because we did not get, we were not on track to meet our targets based on our last comp plan. And this time around, it's even more dire.
I think if you legislate from the outset, it's, again, we're going to end up in a place where we maybe not want to be. If we start and be like, hey, this is pretty permissive, we can see all these, well, not all of them. We can see a majority of the edge cases, right? And then we can work to kind of ratchet those things down that don't necessarily work as well in our community. But I think if you start from no, getting to yes is very, very hard.
Very good. Okay. We've got a lot, so I'll keep moving here. This is all about shared yards, but I think this is pretty dependent on the earlier slides, so I don't know that we need to go in detail into this. And then private yards as well. I guess taking the temperature on open space and yards in general, require any sorts of dimensions. Let's say they're all private yards, or what to do with the remaining 40 to 50 to 60% of a lot that is not covered by buildings.
Are you saying like open space and or driveway parking? Is that kind of the two
Open
things we're
space.
looking
So
at?
right now we require a private yard at least 8 feet in any direction and 80 square feet. So about 8 by 10. We have a table in our planning conference room that is exactly that. So we use it for dimensions a lot to kind of visualize.
Essentially 5 feet by 8 feet is the minimum. Because we only have 5 foot setbacks.
Well, we've got 8
Sure.
feet in any direction and 80 square feet. So it would need to be about 8 foot by 10 for each unit, as in this draft is currently written.
Front or back.
front or back or anywhere that it has direct access. I think including or on the roof. Yep. And then we had the shared, if you don't have a private yard, then you have a shared yard that's 15 by 15. No, the setback, these would be more internal to the lot. So I'll go back to like,
So like you could have your second story overhang.
so the setbacks are the external. Like this. But where the yards would be somewhere in the middle. It could be the setback.
That makes sense.
No, but it's fine.
And there are very.
Yes, but no.
There are many ways to arrange that. I guess we can simplify it to have regulations that require yards in any sort of dimension or any open space in general. Kind of like in the bigger buildings, we require 75 to 100 square feet of open space that can be all consolidated into a play area or basketball hoop or whatever, indoor. Some can be on the roof and everything. Right now with the middle housing, we've got that you either have a private yard 8 feet by 10 feet about, or you have access to a shared yard 15 by 15. Get a little bit more efficiency out of the shared yard, but if you did not have any yard requirement, I would expect a lot of basically we've got house driveway and some landscaping, but not much in the way. That's where buyers, I guess, will either demand it or prioritize something else over it.
I'm pro a little bit of shared space, whether it's private or what you have up there. I do think that's important, especially if we want to have people create community. They're going to need a place to see each other.
I'm supportive of that. I have a question. Something's been bothering me. I live in North Everett and I've seen a lot of lot splitting of some sort where the front house faces the main street and people are building a detached dwelling that faces the alley and the lot is being essentially split in two. In that case, would both of those lots now need to have that 8 by 10 private yard, or how does that work when a lot gets split into two?
It's a good question, probably. But I don't
I'm just
know.
wondering if that's prohibitive because of space. It feels like a lot of the back lots that are on the alley don't have a lot of extra space besides the dwelling itself and maybe a parking pad of some sort. So I was just curious how that might work in that scenario.
Yeah, those are the tough ones to interpret when you're adding and changing and everything. I think you would probably require each one, but I could see a situation where you would only require it for the new development and exempt the existing development. 5,000 square foot lot, you are limited to 3,000 of it's covered by building. So the 2,000 square feet under this has to be something that's not covered by building. So I
Right,
think
so
part
I
of the
think that's
thinking is
where my
like, may as well be
question-
yard.
Yeah, I think that's where my question is. I wasn't necessarily thinking we'd change anything on the front existing lot, but on that back lot, would we be requiring that private yard?
Well, they would already be built. If you split it, can you even stop it from being split? Like,
It could be in the subdivision standards, but yeah, you would decide where to split it at least 8 feet behind the main house where that's possible. The state recommended middle housing standards had a 30 by 30 shared yard. So why we dropped from 30 by 30 to 15 by 15 is exactly North Everett, because there were many houses that were set farther back and we didn't want to preclude those rear units. 15 seemed to do it, which happens to be close to 8 plus 8. Okay, so some interest in yards of some sort. Okay.
Last time we discussed this, because we did discuss this before, I think, and there was discussion around whether or not it's more beneficial to protect public green space and create walkable pathways to utilize the public green space rather than requiring individual lots to have their own mini green spaces. And I don't think we settled how we felt about that entirely as a commission. But I'm kind of reminded of this conversation now. And I think it really just depends on the neighborhood. That's why it's difficult to make this apply across the whole city because a lot of the neighborhoods are so different. Do you remember that conversation? Nathan, I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
you were here for
Yeah,
that.
I do.
Mackenzie, you as well. Do you recall that?
I think so, because I think
That
I
was-
remember us deciding that 30 by 30 was a lot, or at least coming to us with 30 by 30 was a little too much for us.
Yeah, we were also talking, this might be like a year ago, on the bigger zones. So that's the one that requires the 75, and this actually goes back to the park impact fee discussion. And when to potentially exempt open space or reduce open space requirements if you're proximate to a public park. Where I sit on that is, and we've been debating this in the planning department and other places this entire time, and there are a lot of, there's no clear answer on it. I think in the bigger zones, I am very comfortable having the public park system carry the recreation weight for that because I'm not seeing very good output from, the little sad playground that's in the corner next to the road is not providing the value that could have been used for building space and then a good park system. I do feel the opposite for the neighborhood residential zone, that what else is that 3/4 of the city if it is not defined by more open space? But that's also something that we can think about as potential exemptions for certain locations or something.
Yeah, because there are some locations, even in the neighborhood residential, where they are in close proximity to excellent parks. But then there are other locations where you cannot safely walk to a park. And so I think that something like this is more important in those spaces. And I don't know if there's a way to
Make everybody happy.
make everybody happy. Yes, the magic wand. That's what we would like on this one. Thank you.
Note that.
Need magic wand.
Need magic wand. Okay, these are all the porch types. Let's please not get into the
Back
details.
to open space for 1 second. And I mean, even when people are in close proximity to a park, I mean, if you are a parent with young kids, you still potentially want some place for them to be safe in close proximity to your own residence that you can kick them out for 5 or 10 minutes, or even be sitting outside having a cup of coffee where you're not having to transport and do that. So, I mean, I think in the neighborhood residential, that's still a valuable asset to have. I mean, I know not everybody wants it, but at the same time, it's sort of why people are moving into neighborhood residential areas.
So fun fact, when I was a kid, I lived in a place called Union Bay, which was near the UW because my parents were students. And we actually had a swing set inside the house because there was a park that we could walk to, but that was the issue, Alice-Ann. So I can certainly empathize with that as well.
Okay, I thought we were done with 1908, but I remember there was a section on garage requirements that isn't too far from the discussion we've been having. This is existing language, although it is more applicable in a middle housing world than it used to be when you just couldn't very much build these types of buildings. So everything in this is 1908-060, everything that is in black is existing language that we did not change except to clarify that a semi-subterranean garages are allowed to project above the adjacent finish grade by up to 4 feet. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but that's from the state's model guidance. All of these requirements for garages and the limiting to about 50% of the length of the street facing dwelling unit facade used to only apply to middle housing in the single family zones where allowed, but not for houses unless they were on a small lot of 4,500 square feet or less, or got a front or side street setback exception. Just because this is related to kind of orientation, driveways, access, garages. We've had some comments from townhouse development community on this that townhouses obviously aren't very wide. Typically 16 to 24 feet was probably the main range there. So this would effectively preclude townhouses on top of garages. In many circumstances, you could have it rear loaded with the garage in the back and rooms in the front. I think we had a site plan at some point, showed a site plan that had a room in the back and stairs going up in the front. You could flip that and still make this work, but that reduces the flexibility of those developments. So I will. Any thoughts on?
What are you asking?
Just, I am picking up from the, you mentioned garages, we've mentioned driveways, we mentioned flexibility. This is an existing regulation and not one that we had proposed changing, other than necessarily expanding its applicability through to the middle housing. So it's kind of, we didn't do it, but it's kind of.
And you're saying if we
part
keep it
parcels.
as is, it's restrictive,
Yes.
which
Doesn't seem to be the theme of this particular commission. Just gonna point that out to you.
Right, exactly. So that's why I wanted to put it up there. We've had some comments on that from folks who build townhouses that they would prefer some more flexibility with kind of your front door garage. And same spiel from us on sociability and warm embrace of the public street versus more blank walls kind of thing.
Does this also lead to, a maximization of height necessarily, right? Like when you put a garage underneath 2 stories, you're probably gonna hit 35 feet plus whatever real quick.
Yeah.
Um,
And you get a stair for just about every, which is good for health and physical activity.
do we have any loose data on the demographic of people who buy townhouses now?
I don't, but we could see if any folks know that.
I'm just curious
Yeah.
because I have a feeling it's either first-time home buyers or just younger people in general. I don't think aging population loves a lot of stairs. So maybe we should think about them and how they want their houses a little bit more if we're not already.
Right. Right. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Flexibility, and I will continue to read into that. And we are continuing to churn on this among staff, and we'll hear maybe some from the council and from the public on this topic as well. And specific residential uses, just so you know why half of the chapter is red and crossed out, it just got moved to 1913. All right, the big buildings, 1909 Urban Residential Development Standards. This combines and consolidates chapters 9 and 12 in our existing code. Chapter 9, 1909 is residential buildings, and chapter 12 is other buildings, all of which are only in the mixed use and commercial zones, not the single family zones and the multifamily zones. So this is just the opposite of what 1908 applies to, all development in the bigger zones, as well as townhouses in those bigger zones and detached units and everything. 1909 used to cross-reference 1912 back and forth and confuse the heck out of everybody, which is why we're combining those 2 chapters. And in fact, there's a whole table in here that is duplicated in chapter 34 that I missed a piece of. This chapter 9 is also where the inclusionary housing requirement sits for 2 areas of displacement risk in South Everett. Was not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think we discussed it in earlier pieces, but if you'd like to, we could.
Well, just a quick question on that. We did hear from a lot of folks in the community that would be in those areas that are at risk for displacement. And so the recommendations that were brought to us through that process, that community engagement process. Is there any part of those recommendations that we are not choosing to incorporate?
One iteration had a suggestion of affordable housing charge for commercial development. It couldn't be inclusionary, but you could have essentially an impact fee on commercial development. I don't think the very last communications had that in there, but I know that was one area. The other one was, oh, there was one other, density bonus for faith-based organizations or religious land, which is mirrored in state law, requires some density bonus, whatever it is. We've always looked at that and said, what can we give? We don't regulate density. We don't limit density. So everybody gets a density bonus. Although it is regulated and limited by building height and lot coverage and building height. How about that? So we have penciled in for the final draft a 1-floor bonus for development on religious owned and controlled property. That would be one if you have any other suggestions, but we had met with kind of the group there multiple times we're totally open to incentivizing, just couldn't think of one.
Is it owned and controlled or just owned? Because control is different because it's already built.
Owned or controlled, and that could include land that is leased by long-term lease would be what controlled but not owned would be. Yeah. I think those were the two main ones, but then otherwise we got the other ones. And my apologies to the community if I was missing something. We will be rereading through all of that in this final couple weeks. Okay, building modulation, more flexibility. Excuse me. Existing regulations, we have upper floor step back requirements that have been driving architects crazy ever since I've come to Everett. And you can see some images of what that looks like. These are 140 foot by 200 foot lot if you were to build all the way out to, except for the last 3 feet of your property. And then on the left side is 7 stories, on the right side is 25 stories. So UR7 or MU25 would be some examples of how that would look. And you require a step back at 10 feet at floor 4 or 5, and then another 10 feet at a higher floor. Lots of downsides to that. Water intrusion problems. You want to have all of your units stacked so that the plumbing goes up in a straight line and all kinds of things. Yes, it brings some architectural interest and can provide some balconies and everything, but overwhelming negative response from architects and not a whole lot of value that we see. We are in no danger of canyon streets with the width of our streets and everything. So we had proposed pulling that back fairly substantially and instead just requiring, and again, with eyes on the street, some sort of a balcony or outdoor area 8 feet deep on 50% of the horizontal distance, somewhere at floor 2, 3, or 4. We were trying to hit the break point between concrete and wood so that you didn't have the water intrusion and stacking issues. And then your required outdoor amenity space or that sort of thing anyways, may as well have that overlooking the street where, again, you can have some kind of eyes on the street. Have had a couple negative responses on that from the architects. Again, like, no, that's not, no, get rid of them all. And I would, staff are okay pulling back on this one.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have scratched our heads a little bit. It was came out of Metro Everett, came out of some other things. It's tough because we don't know who really wants this. So if they're out there, come forward. You've got 5 weeks. Otherwise, this is gone.
Sounds good.
Okay. We removed a couple others that have been frequent, and a lot of these standards are modifiable, and so you can request a deviation from it, and we have been granting those deviations, finding that it meets the criteria. We require that residential building facades look like a series of buildings no wider than 50 feet each, proposing to remove that. Removing a requirement for some balconies and balustrades to be opaque. I think this was so that you can't see like a neighborhood residential zone next to you, but it didn't seem to really serve that purpose well, and actually can be negative in that sense. In our air quality work and reviewing the plan against in the environmental review process and looking at kind of pollution burden and things like that. A lot of research. I think we talked about this in the Planning Commission, but okay. So a lot of research on very close to high traffic roadways, very bad, especially for kids. We did not get to any sorts of restrictions on childcare on Evergreen Way, which is something that still kind of bothers me a little bit. Because the research is pretty strong on the negative effects, but at least the playgrounds or that open space that is required for a building should be on the other side of the building from like an Evergreen Way. We reduced the dimensions for the private open space required just to better fit the balcony, a reasonable, common, economical and everything balcony size. So it doesn't have to be 6 feet deep. It can be 4 feet deep. And then I think that was 4 by 8 or something was balcony size there. We removed the restriction on ground floor residential on TOD streets, Pacific, Everett Station, a lot of other places. We definitely want to see active uses. Are you sensing a theme here on the street? Healthy city, vibrant streets, eyes on the street. But simply prohibiting residential does not seem like the right way to do it. You're more likely to get blank walls, and not everything can fit commercial. So we did not add any new requirements to fill that space, but we did remove the prohibition on ground floor residential. That's actually in 1905, but it really impacts these types of buildings.
Is there any prohibition to, I mean, it seems weird to me in my brain, but I'm saying it, that like if you have a longer, street first floor, that you've got some of your building is residential, some of it's commercial, no prohibition against mixing those two ground floor uses at all, right? Like,
Right.
okay.
Building code might make that difficult in some way, but nothing out of the land use code, and maybe not even.
The commercial code at that point
Oh,
anyway.
okay.
That number of buildings here in the commercial code.
Okay. The table that you see on the bottom is existing language that requires minimum building depth on the ground floor, and that would be building available to any use. Then there is this table 12.3, a lot of standards for facades, and don't know how to summarize this other than to put it up on the screen. I note that the business zone being collapsed in the mixed urban zone means that some parts of Evergreen Way and Everett Mall Way earned themselves some articulation requirements and blank wall standards. Otherwise, no change to the MU zones or the UR zones.
Is this where, sorry, the window requirement for large buildings?
Transparency?
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. Is that in this section or is that a different area?
That is in this section.
Did we reduce that 90% number?
I don't think we did. I think, yeah, that's something that we have
Me too.
heard frequently, that especially the 90% is
Bizarre.
high. That is that table that I mentioned that I just found the duplicate of. So it's in 1909 and was in 1912 and is also in 1934, the street designations. So there is a chance that it says one thing in one and a different thing in the other. There was already some discrepancies between those two that we needed to clean up. So we'll be deleting one of the tables and consolidating into one. Weather protection and transparency are the two. We get more concern about transparency just because of the cost and the energy code. I don't think we just got to that, and haven't heard a lot of comments as part of this process, but definitely in development review we had. Should I read into that a interest in providing, and that is modifiable. So if someone has a good reason, that's one that we've been granting. So it's not a hard and fast, you have to hit 90%. It's just, you have to talk your way out of it. But
We
if
should
we always
remove
say
that.
yes, then
Yeah, then that should be reduced. I don't know if there's a Goldilocks number or if it's just
I was gonna say, can you
Scratch it
review the
'cause they-
permits where you've made that particular alteration, come up with like they all had 50% or
Right.
something?
60 or
And
40.
let's start there-ish.
Yep. So 90% is on TOD designated streets, 60% on pedestrian designated streets. Pedestrian is the far more common and is most of our arterial corridors. And then 45% for connector and residential mixed use, and no standard for undesignated streets. A note that we have not modified the street designations anywhere in the city as part of this process. It is something that we had been kind of meaning to look at. I don't know that any problems have jumped out, but know that we are expanding multi-unit building and taller structures into streets that maybe didn't need to have a street designation, and maybe so that I think we'll pick that up, if not in the waning weeks of this process, as part of the sub-area planning. But just keep that in your mind, that a lot of these things that connect to street designations, there may be some streets that now allow bigger buildings but don't have a street designation and could see completely blank walls, for example.
If it makes sense to simplify that chart and have them be more the same, I mean, that's what I'm urging you to do.
Okay.
I know the city's doing like a street safety report where the designations may become somewhere from that or not.
They're mostly within the curbs, so intersections and all of that, but yeah.
So so the minimum for a non-TOD, TOD is at 90, but the minimum is 45 for connector or residential mixed use. Is there any reason why everything can't be 45 at the minimum?
Well, the minimum is undesignated streets, which is see blank walls. And
Well, yes, exempting that category.
yeah. Which is the vast majority of the city is undesignated streets. I cannot remember what blank walls is, but it's something like if you have 100 feet of concrete or stone that you need some architectural treatments to it, I think.
Transparency.
Right, so you would not require any transparency, so you could have a block length stamped concrete wall.
All I hear there is great graffiti art.
Honestly, that's honestly what I'm thinking.
Like our huge graffiti thing. When those artists came in, and a great opportunity for them to come back and be like, canvas.
That's what I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I could drive that, but I get it, you don't want it to be too ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like art.
okay, we'll work in some more flexibility on transparency. We also had the request on weather protection.
Is that just like having a bit of an overhang?
Yeah. Sun, rain, wind, snow.
We should do that.
Day like today, I think I had to wipe my glasses off, because not that you could make it across the street anyways, but
Do you get a lot of pushback from developers on that currently?
some, mostly it is pinch points. It's, I don't think a huge cost in most of the building, but if they got to a place where does it occur? Topography can be complicated.
Do they have a way out if they need to?
Yeah, it's modifiable.
All right, well, then I'm good with what it is.
Pretty much everything that we're talking about here is modifiable, and the standards are, does it result in equal or superior development? Does it not impact the neighbors? And does it meet the intent of the standard? A common one is if a building is set back, usually they want to bring it to the sidewalk, maximize space. Sometimes it's set back 10 feet and the weather protection is not going to help over the landscaping. If that's what they have, in those cases, it's an obvious choice. We say, yes, you can not do it. Structured parking, these are existing. They only regulate the front building facade, and we're proposing to make that both front and side streets. The front is always the narrowest side. you will see there's a couple developments. One of them is being built right now on Pacific, and there's a couple others that are in the pipeline that are long parts of the block. All of these standards that had applied only to the front building facade only apply to the Pacific side, but not at all to the Rockefeller, Lombard, and all the rest. Seemed like a big miss for what the goals were for these. So we just crossed out front, but that will bring in the side street applicability, only affects corner properties and specifically the ones that are long and skinny, full block ones. Okay, that was 1909. Anything we wanted to go back to? I think we're doing pretty okay on time.
I did have one question. I know that there's been some public comment about, again, focused on North Everett, like the 19th corridor that we were talking about and that turning into UR4 and how that interaction might look with the rest of the neighborhood residential, like what the transition between those two zones might look like. I know we've talked a little bit about transitions and heights and things like that, but just
Yeah.
as we're talking about 1909 versus 1908.
Yep.
Just wanted to talk through that.
Yes, sorry, that was louder than I thought. The transition is, I don't think we have it's on a future slide, so we'll see if there's a height reduction for adjacent, but they're so similar, I think, 45 feet, maybe even 40 feet in UR4, 35 in NR. So and then there's the 100% lot coverage, was just working this out earlier today. UR4 has a no front setback, but 5 on the side and rear. If it were a 5,000 square foot lot, that already drops you to 75%, if the math was right, lot coverage, just because you can't be in the setbacks. So now you're talking a difference of potentially 60% to 75%, 35 feet to 40 feet. And then it's hard to get up to the 75% with driveways and parking areas and everything already set, or the 100%. So I don't see those two. In fact, the UR4 is kind of designed to be the middle ground between the taller zones that do have some compatibility concerns and the neighborhood residential. I don't think there are many special treatments, but that would be one to look at the landscaping chapter for. Okay, specific use standards mostly just received the specific residential uses from 1908. We have some drive-through service requirements for a new drive-through, so not an existing one, but a new one would require walk-up service as well. We talked about this like a year ago. Haven't changed it since then. And then they would be prohibited in centers, except that you could reestablish an existing drive-through as long as it was part of a development that meets the minimum height standard, which is 2, 3, or 4 floors. So it could be part of a bigger building or a larger development. I think that's that. Keep cruising. Airport Port Navy compatibility, we've talked a lot about, so I think we could probably breeze through this one, but I have very exciting news, which is that the Rucker Hill neighborhood and the Port of Everett have come to agreement on terms between the two sides. So that will be folded into the final draft, and that will discharge that specific amendment request.
I feel like there should be like a confetti burst or something.
We'll ask, we'll ask them to blow a foghorn or something. The freight compatibility overlay, we talked about this. This was the port specific amendment request. I cannot believe that staff had been not compelled by the need for freight compatibility overlay, although not also seeing any real downside to it. I wrote out what it would look like just to have it in the back pocket, and then it's in the draft now. So I guess one last touch on that, if there's a strong opinion from the Planning Commission on whether, if If it wasn't there, I wouldn't suggest adding it. If it is there, I don't know that I would go all the way to removing it. So I self-created hardship here. But is there any strong opinions from the planning commission? Otherwise, we may just let it ride and see how it goes.
I don't have like the strongest opinion, but for whatever reason, my gut's like, maybe not.
Mhm. It is just just a reminder of what it is. It's notification to the developer and everything, and to the port. And again, I see it as harmless.
I think that was a specific ask of Commissioner Ballard to define something so the public could have some assurance that there was a defined something that they would receive, if I recall the conversation correctly. Am I recalling that correctly? Yeah, just something to reassure the public that when we considered this, we considered what a reasonable layperson would need in order to be reasonably informed.
Yeah.
And so I think it is good to have a standard in there.
Okay, great.
Hold on. Does that mean we are suggesting that there be a freight?
There is one in the April 7th draft. I was in this room a couple weeks ago. I was explaining how it's not there, and then I looked and it was there. We're working fast. Yes.
Oh, I mean, okay, well, I just don't really want port compatibility.
A freight
A freight
compatibility.
compatibility. I just,
Yeah.
on the record for, I don't
Yeah.
really want one.
Yeah. Okay. These will be in the last sets of issues that we'll continue to have conversations. And if there's commenters out there, comment periods open till May 26th. Okay, heights. Again, we eliminated the building height map. We have an intended number of floors and a maximum in feet. The intended number of floors doesn't really do anything now, but it puts on paper what the intent was. One example is we're learning about modular construction, has taller needs. I think it was more like 12 feet instead of 10 feet. So that means that if you're building modular, you cannot quite get 7 stories in the 75 feet, I think, that we have in the UR7 zone. I don't know that we want to make changes to the maximum height at this late stage, but by putting the intended number of floors, that can be a guide to smooth the path later down the line, or maybe with administrative deviation requests or that sort of a thing. The formula we used for converting the number of floors, UR7, 7 floors, that type of thing, is 10 feet per floor, and then 5 feet on the ground for residential zones, or 10 feet for mixed-use zones for a taller commercial ground floor plate. Light and heavy industrial zones were set to a flat 100 feet, not often reaching for the sky, although they do have cranes and smokestacks and things like that that do fall under this. The light standards in the Norton terminal at the port needed a variance from the hearing examiner, I think, or no, maybe it was just the industrial waterfront height incentive. Either way, just light poles count as well, not just buildings.
For the height, in like a UR7, is that adjustable by just a request?
No.
No, so it
That
would be
is
like a planned development overlay or something similar that the developer would have to go through.
Yeah. Variance with the hearing examiner, which is a pretty tough. Yeah.
I feel like we're being pretty ambitious with our height adjustments at this point, and I'm not inclined to go back and revisit that one.
Maybe not in like NRC or NR or UR4, but it's 714.5. Like a 12-foot floor height would not bother me in the slightest.
So what has tripped us up with trying to figure that modular thing out, or taller floor plates, is that if you were to say, so MU7 allows 80 feet, it is, whatever 7 times 12 is more than 80, I believe, 84. So let's say you can't get 7 full floors of modular. So what's the solution? Instead of 80 feet, you make it 85 feet. Now, all of a sudden, with stick-built construction, you can get an 8th floor on there. Do we want an 8th floor on there? Is that a problem? Which one are we trying to regulate? The total interior floor area or the external bulk of the building? A little bit of both. And that's where we decided or didn't decide, but didn't suggest a change.
The discussions I've had in the community have been more around defined height
Mhm.
rather than number of floors, because you can have wild variations if you just base it on the floor. So I think it is important to give a defined height limit. And I mean, obviously, as construction evolves, there may need to be processes, but it sounds like there's a process in place for someone to come to the city and have a discussion about a modular type of development project where they may have a specific ask. But in general, I think we're doing really great work as far as expanding what we can do with the heights that we have already kind of settled on here.
I don't have a problem leaving the height numbers. I do want to make sure that there is an avenue for somebody to come and say, hey, we really want this because we want to do modular home. We want to do modular housing. So as long as there's an avenue, that makes me feel comfortable.
Find a church, I suppose. Get another floor.
We should,
To that end, what
Good.
would be a long-term lease, right? Like, could a developer come in, church, say, hey, I'm going to donate the money, church buys the property, we lease it for a year. Congratulations, we build, we get our height bonus.
Yeah,
Done.
maybe. I don't know.
That seems like a really not churchy thing to do in my view of
Right.
how a church should work, but
Right.
they're
Well, they've
yeah.
supported housing. Yeah, this is language straight from the state. So I'll try to figure that out a little bit more. A little bit cheeky in saying go find a church, but I mean, it is true that it's an issue. And this is again with when we're ready for a recommendation at the next meeting that one of the things that you can communicate to staff at any time, but this would be a good time for it, is where you think more work is needed, even if we acknowledge that it's difficult to do in the last couple of days. So light and heavy industrial zones, 100 feet. For the most part, these are not going to be objectionable to anybody, but we have waterfront industrial zones all around. And in our current building height map, those have lower heights. Existing is about 45 to 75 feet. And then the additional 20 feet for certain uses with a view analysis. That's what the port used for the light standards at Norton Terminal. We were proposing to replace, we needed to come up with, since we're dropping the height map, you need a height limit for the light industrial or the heavy industrial zone. So we went with the higher end. But in the waterfront, recognizing the view implications and the shoreline implications, we're suggesting some trigonometry or geometry or something where you start at the street at the top of the bluff, 10 feet below the center line, and then you go 40 feet above the ordinary high water mark, and that's your plane of height. So taller, closer to the bluff where you're less likely to interrupt the views, shorter, closer to the water. The port is one of the probably most sensitive to this because of their need for cranes and other tall things. I think this wound up with a slight decrease in their height right at the shoreline that we need to take a look at. We're working with them on that. That could involve the additional 20 feet for certain uses with view analysis. Those certain uses are water dependent uses, and the view analysis makes sure that you're not going to block a substantial number of Olympic mountain views.
That's around the light standards.
Right. Light stand, and we have a view analysis from several streets and everything. Here are the height reductions. So from the development site zone, this is the one that UR4 is not in, but if it was a UR7, and there are not many because we have mostly the wedding cake style, but where you have a UR7 development site and the neighbor is NR zone, for 50 feet into the UR7 zone, you would be limited to the 35 feet of the NR zone so that you would limit the very tall buildings next to very short buildings. This is pretty similar to what we have now, just with the new zone names. From height reductions to height incentives, we removed the entire development height incentives program. We want people to build taller buildings more efficient. They are more expensive. It seems a little bit backwards to require them to pay for what we're looking for. So all of the height limits are now by right. If we want the things, so one of the height incentives was affordable housing. You can trade it for your height incentive. Now instead, you could say that we require that affordable housing where we need it instead of only requiring the tallest buildings to pay for it. We've got these two questions that I mentioned that we're going to suggest adding the 1-story bonus height for religious organizations and then adding back the industrial waterfront height increase for the port. Okay. Street designation. We have talked, this is the other chapter that the same table is in from 1909. So I think we talked through this already. I'm rushing a little bit to try to get to parking because that is brand new. We've talked about most of this before. Landscaping, we turned up the dial a little bit on trees instead of 30 feet apart, 25 feet apart in type 3 landscaping areas. Some new street tree requirements in neighborhood residential zones where currently, for the most part, you need to do a land division to trigger that. And since we don't do all development via land division anymore, that was missing a whole lot of trees in a whole lot of the city. We do not have tree retention requirements as part of this. So turning up the dial on the trees and landscaping seemed to be an important mitigating measure. Okay. Frontage improvements. More development on streets without sidewalks and without full streets built to standards. Started with a writing this in as all residential development would require frontage improvements. We have still since, in response to comments, exempted 1 or 2, accessory dwelling units on a lot with the principal unit to remain from the requirement from frontage improvements. That is now then a little bit of a turning up of frontage improvements. It used to require you needed, when development resulted in 3 or more dwellings, but the sidewalk improvement area, you can see the blue there, is a big chunk of the city. And in there, all development of 1 or more residential dwelling units, excluding accessory dwelling units. So in the blue area, I think this does not represent an increase, but in the not blue area, it does represent an increase. 1 meter per dwelling unit. I don't deal with utilities very often, so I'm not sure how often they have discretionary reviews. So I think it kind of varies currently, but maybe this is a new standard. And if this is a problem, we would love to hear that. Billboards are allowed in certain zones, and none of those zones exist anymore and haven't for a decade. So we have already effectively prohibited billboards, and there's an ordinance that says that we want to. And so we just finished the job by finishing the job here. Parking, and I think we can linger on this one a little bit longer because this is the last pretty substantive one. All of this comes from Olympia. 2024 Senate Bill 6015 had some required dimensions and surfacing and all of that. 2023 accessory dwelling units prohibits cities from requiring parking within a half-mile walking distance of a major transit stop, and then also a max of 1 per unit on lots smaller than 6,000 square feet and 2 on larger. There's a table in your memo at the end that puts this all into one place. Major transit stop, rail, Swift BRT. ADUs have a different, this was dizzying, literally dizzying. ADUs only have a different definition of major transit stop, which is frequent transit, which is 15-minute service, 5 hours per weekday, which is different than for other housing. Major transit stop is rail and BRT. That is where major transit stops are. So in these areas, we may not require parking of accessory dwelling units. And then middle housing, no parking required within a half mile of major transit stop. That's the other definition of major transit stop, which is rail and bus rapid transit. The lighter circles are where planned BRT routes will be, but are not in place currently. And then proximate to frequent transit or very and extremely low income housing and seniors and disabled housing have these parking limitations on what the city can require for parking as well. Note that all of these are circles, roughly a half mile. It's actual walking distance, which is usually more like a diamond shape in a grid system or a funny shape elsewhere. In almost all cases, in every case, it's going to be smaller than the circle contained within it. This one was since superseded by this year's Senate Bill 5184, but it is still effective for 18 months, I think it is. 5184 is the most stringent of all of these, just passed the legislature. It is due for the city in January of 2027, and it caps parking requirements at 1 space per single family dwelling unit, half a space for multifamily dwelling unit. Interesting that middle housing was not included, given that the legislature itself just created middle housing by legislation. And then no parking at all may be required for dwellings under 1,200 square feet, which includes all accessory dwelling units. Also for affordable housing, senior housing, small commercial, childcare, change of use, and ground level non-residential space in mixed use building. This is a big one, and we wrestled with how close to come to compliance with it. We have 18 months. This is brand new to us. We did most of the housing and just a little bit of the commercial side, keeping with our overall focus on housing, but wanting to maybe use that year to better understand the commercial implications.
I got a quick question. When we talk about middle housing and multifamily, what separates
I don't know.
designation there? That's
I don't think
middle housing is a very wide spectrum of ideas that.
Yeah, middle housing is, that is defined in state law as duplex, triplex, townhouse, cottage housing, accessory dwelling units, sometimes detached houses, yes.
Or we're going to
courtyard
your
apartments.
four to whatever, so how does that?
Yeah, it's not a great fit with the state's definitions for this parking regulations. So with our system of dwellings or dwellings, what is multifamily and what is single family and what is all the stuff in between? And could we have 5 spaces per duplex? And does that fit this? Some questions, and Commerce will be.
And then is distance from transit, is that as the crow flies or as a public sidewalk?
Yeah, public sidewalk.
Okay.
So high level, you're saying, let's circle back in detail, like you want more time to digest this is what.
On the commercial side. No,
Right.
we have it
Yes, on the-
included on the residential side.
Yeah, on the commercial
But we're
side.
suggesting for now.
That's fine. I did
okay.
have one quick question
Yeah,
though.
on this last one.
It had childcare listed as no parking required, but then I see in a later slide, we talk about that. We talk about
That we
it.
do.
I wasn't sure if they were in conflict. I just didn't know why I didn't understand. We can wait till we get to that slide.
Sure. Yeah, I
So-
think we eliminated a proposed, because we're also in a childcare crisis of some sort now. So we proposed eliminating the requirement for just basic parking spaces, but loading spaces were included, I
Okay,
think.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when it comes to parking, we talk about the ADUs and the no parking of required, but under current city code, if you remove parking from the main house, or you have to have house parking for the main house.
Right.
Because like, let's say you have a garage on an alley and you want to destroy the garage, put ADUs up, you destroy a 2-car garage, right now by code, you have to supply 2 parking spots from the alley,
Correct.
from the main house.
Correct. Even though the accessory dwelling unit might be exempt for its
Yeah.
own parking, but you would have to replace the principal units parking. That's
And that
correct.
would still be required.
That where we're at is 1 space as a baseline per dwelling. So in that case, if you demolish the garage, you would Well, it depends where it is in the city, transit adjacent and all of that.
That's, I mean, if you're close to transit,
Then I have to look at it. Hold that thought.
No
Let's get
problem.
A couple down. I'm not even sure if I have this in the slide. One more piece of legislation. We have a little bit longer for this, 2030, within a quarter mile of BRT or a half mile of rail, no parking required at all, and that are within these circles. Okay, here's what we have proposed. So a baseline of one space per dwelling. If you're within a quarter mile of frequent transit, that is down to 3/4 of a space per dwelling. No parking required for middle housing within a half mile of major transit. So I think that captures that North Everett, if it's close enough to Broadway, that no parking would be required. Let's say it's not within a half mile of major transit, you would require one space per dwelling, which would be the house. But the ADU would be exempt because it's under 1,200 square feet. If it is an ADU, if it is under, whatever it is, if it's under 1,200 square feet. So in that case, if you took down the garage and built a unit on it, you would need one space for the combined. If it was under 1,200 square feet. If you took down the garage and it was 1,500 square feet, you would need two spaces. And that goes down from there if you're close to transit.
that's to the transit stop or,
To the transit stop, walking distance, yeah. Okay. I did all this like a week ago, and it's amazing what can all fill your brain in a week. No change proposed to all of these things, commercial. I think these are. No, here he is. The ones that are highlighted will need to be reduced within 18 months. So these are the ones where we said, and that's why daycare center is highlighted. Fill out the proposed column there. We will have to look to 1922 in book 2, which I don't have in front of me to see what was written in for daycare center. I believe it is deleting the greater of 1 per 10 children and all of that, but it does still require 1 loading space per 20 children. I believe we did not change food, beverage, athletic facility, office, and retail trade. But recognize that we will need to. That's it.
are these,
Update zone references. So I'll
are
go
these
back.
parking requirements gonna? If you have to reduce them so much in a transit area, so I'm looking at downtown here.
Mhm.
Are we gonna? Does this affect the idea that we're gonna have limited parking for any of the big living structures then that go up? So is everybody gonna be parked on the street? Then is that gonna limit people shopping?
Yeah, they cannot park on the street. For the most part, it's time limited parking
Okay.
and everything. I would recommend that apartment building downtown build parking. Because it's gonna be, many people and will do just fine without it, but not everybody, and it is a long walk to the nearest parking space that you can leave a car overnight. We will not have maximums or anything to prohibit or discourage parking. It will be flexible, market-based.
Commissioner Shelby and I are both going to talk about how the market will.
Oh, yeah, the market's gonna decide this.
The
I think.
market will decide this.
but-
'Cause I
but-
need my parking personally, that I
Yeah.
will not spend if it doesn't include the parking situation
Mhm.
that I like. And I think that is what we are relying on the market to produce, is for people to choose what works for them and for developers to find it to be not viable if they're not meeting the needs of the market.
That's what I was gonna make sure that flexibility was there to have the parking. That's what I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and if we're not gonna, I think if we're not gonna go to 0, like a number of other communities have, just rip the Band-Aid off. Like, let's do the changes we need to do now in residential, take everybody down to 0.5. Don't deal with the ramp. We can deal with commercial next year or, what have you, but take everybody down to 0.5. You have one standard for everything in residential, just deal with it. Oh, send them my way. Like, I go for it. Yes, if you want to pay for parking, pay for parking. If not, don't worry about it. You don't have to mandate the way people build buildings.
So I think in the table that's in the packet, there are some little green arrows, and there are two that we went earlier than we needed, and most of them were just, so we did not go all the way. So I hear one suggestion to go a little bit farther on the residential side. Yeah.
So that's actually good to let the public know that there is further that we could go, but we are listening and we are trying to balance the asks of the community. Because as Commissioner Shelby said, we could go further with this, but we really are trying to balance the needs.
We will be bound by the state. It's a slow decline to get there, but if we're doing all this work now and we're preparing for all these changes, having portions of the city like, well, you got a little bit more parking over here, a little bit, like, no, just, if you want a uniform appearance, this is how you do it. You go build this way. If you're going to say build this way, just do it.
I can feel the torches being lit, the pitchforks being sharpened as we speak.
The thing that always comes to my mind with parking is that you can only care if there's less parking on the street if you didn't have your own parking space, which is certainly the case if you either have a large family or are having a party or something. But for the most part, yeah, it's going to be up to folks too. There's also a market out there. There's some website where you can rent somebody else's parking space. So there will be, as parking gets tighter, which I would expect it to, we had 35,000 housing units and everything. That if somebody has an unused driveway space, they can lease it to you, or garage spaces or whatever. So. Okay.
Is that the end of the presentation?
That's the end of everything. Back
Okay.
to the next steps. And I guess just, and if we have any energy left to think about what we do for next week. So we plan to publish the final draft and the ordinances. We'll take all of this feedback into account there, as well as all the public feedback that we're getting. So that's next Friday. You can expect to see the next and final iteration of the whole thing. Plan regulations. We'll get that comment report out so you can see summaries and details of what people have been saying. You'll have a public hearing, and then make a recommendation. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to discuss among yourselves about how that goes, or we can just see you in a couple of weeks.
Just go with the flow.
Okay.
Will there be an opportunity for us to maybe swing by and pick up a completed printed one just to review? And again, I won't be here at that June 3rd, but I want to at least be able to read through it in its entirety to make sure there's nothing that comes up. I feel like we have discussed and discussed and discussed. So I am looking forward to us finally having an opportunity to recommend.
Yeah. Yes, we'll get you. Does anybody else want? I think it's on Friday and we mail it. It could maybe get there. We could definitely have a cup. We're in temporary offices right now because they're rebuilding the 8th floor. And should I say the name of the company? No, I won't. I will give them a break. But they missed 5 pickups to move our copier printer, so we don't have a printer.
Pick up the phone and call us.
Sorry, but then in pretty soon, and I'm not sure, I think it's after next week, the whole building is closing for a couple of weeks so they can finish, and we're almost to a completely rejuvenated Everett Municipal Building, and staff will be so excited. So before I promise printing, there are some complications there, but I will be in touch via email on what we're able to do.
Sounds great. We do have one last opportunity for public comment. Ayana, do we have anyone online who wishes to comment?
Does caller ending in 1238 like to make a public comment? Caller with number ending in 1238. No comments from callers.
Thank you. I'm
If
not
you
sure
could,
this
if
is-
you
oh, it
could
is.
state your name and then afterwards, if you wouldn't mind just filling out the form so we can have it for the record.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
My name is OJ Marston. I am a real estate agent, so I can bring up a few things about what you guys discussed today, especially when you guys were talking about the placement of the 2 or 3 houses or row houses that could be done. And I know you guys were talking about, it's all about the walkability and the beautification. And I can just tell you, like, I've been doing this 32 years and people want garages. I know you want it to be beautified, but we also have to think about when people don't have a place to store their stuff, the houses become junky. And people have stuff all over, and we have to take that in consideration. I think that's a really important thing to think about. So as much as I'm not a huge fan of going up in the row stuff, it's what we got, and that's going to be our first-time home buyers, home. So I think that's a really important thing to think about is, and a lot of, the next thing would be is space, as far as personal space. A lot of people, they want their own space, not a community yard. Community yards, in my opinion, rarely work. Initially, the HOA handles it. It looks great. We have a play structure, blah, blah, blah. Guess what happens? Go back to all those places in 10 or 15 years. The HOA is no longer happening anymore. I've sold a house right next to one of these big, huge play areas, and all the people have moved away in 15 years. And now the people I sold to, they're thrilled because no one comes to that area. It's their big yard now. But guess what? The play structure's gone because most of them will get rid of them because the liability for insurance. So they go by the wayside. And then next, what happens? People stop taking care of them and it gets overgrown and nobody uses it and everybody's pointing fingers. So I think those are things to think about when we're like, oh, we want this beautification. I agree, but most people take care of their own, not the community, because we're just all struggling just to deal with their own stuff. So, I mean, rooftop decks, when I've sold the row houses with the rooftop deck, that has become a beautiful sanctuary for people. People really, really enjoy that. They feel like if I can't have a big garden or a yard, I can do whatever I want upstairs and entertain people. So I think that's something to really think about, because these joint areas never work out. And if we could get people like, number one, more housing. I'm like, give us 3 over 2 all day long. I need that for my first time buyers. But I also think it's really important to think about it's a place to store stuff till we don't got a junky community, because that's what's going to happen. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Or do we allow rooftop decks? Okay, great.
You asked about epidemiology, and I've been Googling over here. I have been paying attention, but I've also been Googling. So the Urbanist had an article in February, Valentine's Day. Walkability isn't just good urban planning, it's a public health intervention. And it then refers to an article in the Journal of Epidemiology. So there's one. Jane Jacobs, the probably queen of urban planning, her whole philosophy was eyes on the street. And that's where she based it on, basically, and continuing to move forward.
What was the name again? Jane?
Jane Jacobs,
Jane
she
Jacobs.
wrote The Life and Death of the American City. It's like the book that every planner had to read in Planning 101. I mean, I can remember we Xerox the pages because there wasn't enough copies in the library and it's out of print. But you can still find it in the libraries. So I've been putting these on different pages as Yorick was speaking, so I apologize. Reed Ewing, a professor at the University of Utah, has several articles on, and forgive me, do better urban design qualities lead to more walking in, and this one is primarily in Salt Lake City. And so, yes, and do urban design qualities add to property values? Again, same type of thing. And it's about the eyes on the street. And if you think about walking along, I mean, think about streets where the entire subdivision has turned its back on the street and you just have this long stretch and somebody gets in trouble there, who are they going to or how are they going to get help? And, just that kind of thing. You might not be able to use your cell phone or whatever. So it's just that kind of thing. And the walkability scores have made a huge difference. And so I can send you the link to the Urbanist article and I will put these together. Most of them are behind firewalls. Unfortunately, you can only read the abstracts, but I can give them to you. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, well, that being said, I think the point about the shared yard and personal space was a good point. So it's true. Now that I think about it, I used to live in a neighborhood that had one and it was just an empty field that one person was nice enough to mow from time to time.
And I want a rooftop deck.
Yeah, for sure.
Commissioners, did you have any other questions, comments, or any additional thoughts on what we've discussed today?
Hey, no, I would just ask could you break out your lovely table for parking into its own PDF and put that on the 2044 website? Because I think it's an exhibit in today's thing, but I think that would be helpful rather than going through this whole deck and the rest of it. To
Certainly.
really call that out.
Certainly. It might already be on there, but if it's not already, I'll put it up there tomorrow.
That was a great table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
A lot of fun doing that.
Commissioner Welch, I saw you reaching towards your button.
I just wanted to make sure, you said you weren't going to be here on the 3rd.
That is correct.
So I don't know if it's inappropriate or not. If you had any suggestions, once the entire package is put together, if you want to send them probably to Vice Chair Aiken, Atkins, if he's going to be here.
Yeah, I've already checked with
Yeah.
him. He is
So you
going
may
to be
present
here.
your side, and if there's amendments or something you want to have changed.
Yeah, if there's anything that piques my curiosity or that draws my attention, I will email it. So you will have it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because you've been through this whole entire process, I want to make sure that your final thoughts are there, and for any other commissioner that can't make it.
Kind of you to want my final thoughts. Appreciate that.
Jerry, you've worked hard on this, as all of you have. So yeah, you deserve that word. We'll make sure that the changes from the April 7 and May 10th version are highlighted. So I think we'll have one clean version and then one that highlights in yellow, so you don't have to go searching for any changes.
Okay, last call, commissioners.
Motion to adjourn.
I think there's a